Won't sing. I'm always tempted. I mean, I can't sing, so I don't know why I'm tempted. The silence. All right. I know that others will, of course, be joining us as we kick off, but that's okay. So I'm going to officially get us started. Welcome, everyone, for joining. My name is Vicky Kennedy. So I think some of you probably follow me on LinkedIn. Others of you don't and haven't met me. So I'll introduce myself a little bit more in detail in a minute. If you didn't hear me say this earlier, this is set up in webinar mode, so the cameras and mics are off, but please feel free to use the chat. I am probably not going to be monitoring the chat too much while I'm talking, because it's just me. I don't have anyone helping me out here in this webinar. So, but please put a question if you have one as I'm speaking, and then towards the end, time allowing, I'll go back through and see what I can answer for anyone. So please feel free to use that chat as much as you'd like. And yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and kick this off. This is how to build a certification program for scale. And you might imagine the certification is a pretty big topic, lots to cover. So there's, can't get into all the details in one webinar, but my goal is to give you enough information to be thinking about what you need to think about. So really just going to cover kind of the must-knows about building a certification program. And then you'll be able to understand what you need to dive into more if you are in a position to build or expand your own program. So a little bit about me, for those of you who don't know me, again, I'm Vicky Kennedy, and I have about 20 years of experience in building, developing, and scaling certification education initiatives. I actually did begin my career in higher education. So the first decade or so, I worked in college and I guess technical school, career school. During that time, I overhauled the bachelor's degree programs that I worked with and also sat on accreditation boards. So that was sort of my start to what we now think of as certification and accreditation. Jumped over to the tech industry back in 2012, and since then have worked for Amazon and Meta, and more recently DataCamp, working on certification programs, building them globally. And I've done some consulting as well for some larger companies and smaller companies. My experience in certification spans really the program and the product side, the legality side, the testing side. So kind of a range of experience from a practitioner who's built the actual curriculum and the assessments to somebody that's had to roll that out at scale. So that's the experience that I hope to bring to you in this webinar. I did launch my own business called Echtus last fall. So that's why it says I'm CEO of Echtus. It's a small business. I actually am bringing on my first employee next week, so yay! But it is basically I work in doing this in a consulting and service way. So about you, this webinar is really addressing those of you interested in building or growing a certification program for your software product users. So there's a lot, again, certification is a pretty broad topic. So if you found this webinar through LinkedIn and it's maybe not quite what you're looking for, I still think you might find some valuable information from it. But I'm more specifically targeting people that work in a tech company. Maybe, you're looking to roll out a product-centric certification for your SaaS product. This is really going to speak most to you. But again, otherwise, if you're on the call and that's not quite what you're looking for, I do think that you'll still see some valuable information about certification in general. So I welcome you to stay. I just wanted to address, this is kind of the lens of which I am speaking with, is really those working in software products and certifying their users that way. So the topics that I will cover in this webinar is starting off with why offer certification, what is the business value of it. Really important to break down terminology because there's a lot of sort of misunderstandings and misused terms with regards to certification. We'll talk a bit about structuring your certification for scale, navigating the high stakes versus low stakes scenarios, designing a legally defensible exam, what things you need to know about that, and common program policies. So again, as I said in the beginning, there's a lot to get into with certification. We could talk for days about it. I am hoping to give you this foundation through these topics, and then you can dive in deeper from there. So beginning with why offer certification. So if you are working for a software company, a SaaS company, and you're looking to build out your first certification program, maybe you have something out there today, what is the business value and what's the actual strategy behind offering certification? There could be quite a few. Starting with marketing, this is a very common use of certification. So you could build a certification to actually increase your marketing qualified leads or to increase organic reach. So what I mean by that is if you are in a company that you are sort of want to educate your market into understanding more about what you do. So you could be a security company, you could be project management company, you could be marketing, whatever it is, but you want to increase your market to have more understanding and more awareness of what you do so that they would then make more educated decisions to use your product. You could actually use certification to increase, to basically drive their interest in learning more about you. So it's kind of an enticing, kind of carrot of learn more about what we do, learn more about industry, we'll give you a certification, and then you get more marketing qualified leads to actually grow your market. That's a very common use of certification in this, especially in the SaaS world. Kind of parallel to that, you can increase your organic reach by offering badging and having people share those badges. So it can just be a marketing driver, and that's essentially why you would offer certification. Another reason, though, it kind of related to that might be to drive credibility. So if you are a business that wants to be known as credible in your industry, most businesses would, but you want to drive that credibility, offering a certification is one great way of doing that. So, for example, I think off the top of my head, HubSpot is known for a number of certifications, and they have a certification, I believe, in something like email marketing. So they want to drive credibility, and maybe I have someone from HubSpot on the call, I don't know, but HubSpot wants to drive credibility and be a industry leader in that sort of marketing and all those topics. And so they offer certification to drive that credibility. And also, actually, that's a good example that fits in the marketing side as well. Retention, if you have your own customers, you want to promote retention and advocacy in your customer base, offering certification to them where it's more of a advanced user kind of certification. It almost fits like a gamification sort of scenario where, again, you're enticing and tapping into that intrinsic motivation that people have to learn more and to get certification. And so if it's more of a technical product, for example, you may offer certification for those advanced users, and that can promote retention and advocacy. And then a fourth common reason for offering certification is sometimes we see this more on the partner side, reseller side, but about improving quality. For example, on your partnerships, if you do have partners that are out there representing your products, you want to make sure that they're representing it correctly. You want them to represent it the same way as if they were internal employees. And so you have this bar of quality, essentially. And so you would offer certification to your partners or your resellers to make sure that they have met that bar and can therefore go out and represent your product with that same level of quality. So those are four kind of primary, common reasons, certainly not exhaustive list, but this kind of gives you a sense of framing what is your certification for. So if you're on this call and you're, again, about to build a certification or you're expanding your program, I would suggest that you really think about what is the strategy behind your certification, because this is going to be the measure of success for your certification, right? So if I'm building this for the marketing side, that's going to be my measure of success. Very different than if I'm building this as a partner certification, then I have a different measure of success for there. So there's also this thought, well, it could do all of these things. And sometimes it can. If you offer a certification, it can certainly cover a couple of these boxes. But you do want to have a general, clear sense of your strategy, because again, that's going to be your measure of success, and that's going to help you to make decisions around what you should and shouldn't do with your certification. Okay. So why to offer it, we've covered, and I'm going to go into some terminology. So this is a really, really big one. This is a term, the certificate and certification terms are very, very frequently conflated. And even if you search Google for a certification, you will very often, if not always, get a list of certificate programs. And so it's very difficult to distinguish what these two terms mean because they're so commonly misused. But it's really important to understand the difference, because it's not just semantics. It's not just a matter of using one term, instead of the other. There's very clear difference. So certificate is the result of an educational process. If you go to sign up for a certificate program, it's really about learning the material. You're going to learn the material. You're going to complete a series of courses or attend some courses, and then you get a certificate at the end of that. So it's usually an indication of a completion of a course. So that's like certificate of completion. Sometimes there is some assessment to it, but for the most part, it's all about the actual educational experience. It's built by a course creator. It does not expire. And typically there's no experience needed. So for example, you want to go learn SQL, you could look for a SQL certificate. And the idea is you go there, you learn about SQL, and you get the certificate for learning about SQL. Certification, on the other hand, is quite different. It's the result of an assessment process. The certification is specifically about an assessment process. You frequently have training material and educational material that accompanies a certification program, but the certification itself should be about the assessment process. So that is about indicating a level of proficiency or mastery in the industry or in the topic. It should be built around industry standards. So not just the sort of brainchild of one person developing this program, but really looking at what industry standards are. And even if it's a proprietary certification, which I'm imagining many of you on the call are, representing proprietary information, then you still want to have a general consensus of how that fits in within your industry. It should not just be from one point of view. So a certification does typically expire because it's really about measuring someone's level of proficiency, and that level of proficiency can change, right? So just because I happen to know SQL today, for example, doesn't mean that in 3 years I have that same level of mastery or proficiency in it. So it should be something that typically expires and there's a recertification process. And generally speaking, the certification should indicate some kind of experience. So you can, of course, have a foundational certification, which is more foundational, but you see usually like levels of certification, and it's very common to see things like 2 years of experience required or expected, 5 years of experience, et cetera, because certification again is about indicating that someone can do some task or has that knowledge. So these are very different terms, and we do see them often misused, but it's important to understand those differences because you may be on this call and be thinking, oh, actually, we're building a certificate, and that's totally fine. There's a lot of validity in offering certificate programs, and they have some of the same benefits where you have some of those same like badging and opportunities you can get from that badging. But the certification is specifically around that assessment and that measure of success there. So 2 more terms that are commonly sort of misunderstood or also often conflated are certification and accreditation. So certification, we just talked about what that actually is, and it's recognizing an individual or an organization as meeting professional standards. It usually involves passing some kind of exam to demonstrate that level of proficiency, and it may also, as we just mentioned, require some evidence of experience. Certification is usually voluntary. So someone can choose to get certified in a specific topic or subject. Accreditation, however, recognizes a certifying body or assessors. So accreditation is actually the act of accrediting a certification. It's performed by an independent third party, and it demonstrates that the organization that's offering certification is actually following assessment standards. So I know that's a little bit confusing, but certification is specifically about ensuring that someone has that level of mastery in the topic. And accreditation is ensuring that the certification essentially happened the right way. It's very common in education. So if you're in the States, you are probably familiar with higher education accreditation, and all colleges in the United States are typically, legitimate colleges are typically accredited. We have regional and national accrediting bodies. But that's because those colleges should be accredited by this third party to ensure that they're actually assessing and essentially teaching according to standards. So that carries over into some other industries like health and sciences and a few other industries that there's common accrediting bodies. We don't have any standard accrediting bodies, especially in the technology space, but we can talk a little bit about accreditation and some standards there. But simply put, accreditation legitimizes certifications, and certification legitimizes individuals, organizations, services, or products. So it's like one layer is accreditation, the next layer is the certifying body, and then the individual or the organization getting certified. So we can see these terms kind of often misused or conflated there, but there is a clear distinction. And you do not need to be accredited to offer certification. That's a common question that comes up. I'm going to go back to the slide for a second because it depends on your industry. So if you're in the technology space, if you're in the software space, there again is not a standard accrediting body that everyone's expecting that you have. There are some ways to get accredited by some other kind of third-party accreditation, but whether or not you need to or whether or not that means anything is very specific to your industry and very specific to even your vertical within that industry. But if you are offering a certification in something like the health field or certain science fields, then yes, you probably want to look into the different accrediting bodies. But essentially, it's about ensuring that you are following a set of standards. So like ISO standards, for example, that's what accrediting bodies do. And if you don't have a third party validating your process, you can do other things like set up an advisory panel. So if there's not a standard accrediting body that's relevant for what you're trying to do, you can still ensure that level of legitimacy other ways. So the certifying advisory panel is a common way of doing that. Okay. So then the question is, a question may come up about digital credentials because we still hear other terms. And I'm sort of glancing at the chat, even though I said I wasn't going to, but I see some questions there around the word certified. The word certified, I guess I'll go ahead and answer that because I'm just going to do that. Emily asked, can the term certified be used for both certificate and certification? Technically, if we're going by definitions, no, being certified means that you've achieved certification. So earning a certificate is not the same as being certified. But then going back to my slide here, we have credentials. So there's a term micro-credential, for example, or digital credential. And that could really be a broad term. So you can think about credentials as anything that's awarded upon the completion of a learning experience or upon achievement of a certification. So credential is even a wider term. The word micro-credential is often a specific topic that's even more specific than a certificate or certification. But these terms, they vary very much from industry to industry. So, what we see in higher ed may be different than what we see in the tech industry. Ultimately, a badge is a badge and it could be awarded for anything. It's not that that's only for certification or certificates. What's important to you is that you have a consistent definition that you're following. So you can develop a certification program at your company that has verified badges, for example, micro-credentials and certification. But what's important is that a verified badge is always a verified badge. And it's not that one team does something different over here and one product does something different over here. And another team calls this certification and it's just a short quiz, and a team over here calls something else certification. So if you're looking at having different levels of credentialing, you just want to have consistent standards within your organization so that a micro-credential always is XYZ and a certification is always following these standards. So really what I wanted you to take away from these two slides is these terms, they kind of vary. And again, you'll see a little bit different definitions with what credentials are called in different industries. What is most important is that you have a standard at your organization that you follow. And a certification is actually a demonstration of proficiency because that is what drives value of a certification program. You can have a certification program alongside certificate programs. So you don't have to make choices there. It's just they're different. They have different success measures. And one of them is really about the educational process, as we said, and the certification is really what comes later. Is somebody at that level of mastery? Are they at the level of proficiency? So that's what credentialing programs are. And yes, so to be certified is to have obtained certification. Now, a verified badge is like you could have a verified badge. That just means that the organization has verified that you've done whatever it is that badge was awarded for. Another question here is, which standards would you seek out for certification within SaaS tech industry? So there's the professional standards of psychological testing and the ISO standards, which we would recommend, but I'm going to talk a bit more about high stakes and low stakes certification. So I might be able to circle back to that question, Jordan. All righty. So even now within certifications, we have types of certifications. So there's all kinds of certifications. And what I don't have on the slide is you even have you could certify a product for use. And that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about certifying individuals. So there's two distinct types of certifications of individuals. One of them is the professional or career certification. So you're probably familiar with those, like a PMP, project manager certification, or SHRM is a very common HR certification. There's a lot of cloud security certifications. These are professional certifications that are generally offered by associations or organizations. They're typically, and in this case, they would be product or tool agnostic. So it's not about teaching someone how to use a product in HR or in project management. It's about the process and the practices and industry standards. So they demonstrate proficiency in that industry. So this is interesting, like it's specifically about offered by these associations and organizations. It's not usually offered by a for-profit, technology company. And so there may be some of you on the call that are looking at doing that. And that's why I said maybe there's some things here that you'll still pick up. There's some overlap with the way you would build out these certifications, but depending on industry, this is where accreditation may become more of an important thing. SHRM, for example, has an accreditation by a company that I'm now blanking on what the name of it is, but if you go to their site, you can see that they talk about their accreditation. So the other type is the tool or technology certification. So this again is more who I'm talking to today, but this is the examples here: AWS, Cisco, Microsoft, Salesforce. You've no doubt seen any or all of those. I could list a bunch more, but these are the ones that are offered by the technology or software company themselves. This demonstrates specifically mastery of the tool or technology, and it's not just a generic role-based or professional-based certification. We're going to talk about the role-based in a second, but most importantly, Microsoft, for example, is the best one to offer a certification on Microsoft. So they, develop their certification, same with Salesforce. So there are two distinct types. One of them is technology tool agnostic. The other one is specifically about that technology. And the second one is offered by the technology company itself. So those are the two types. We're going to talk about that second type for the rest of this. So how do you think about structuring your technology certification? This is where it can be sort of a novice pitfall to think about it in terms of the product itself. So let's say that you, at your organization, you guys have 3 different products. You may think, okay, we're going to offer a certification on product A, product B, and product C, which you can do, but then it really just becomes about the knowledge of the product. And really, certification is about certifying individuals in their job in one way or another. And so if you think more about the personas and the personas that are using your products, and you think about the jobs that they're doing using your products, then you have a different type of certification. So for example, you may have product A, B, and C, but you may have one persona that's using product A and B to achieve whatever that is. They may be using product A and C to achieve a different outcome in their job. You might have a different persona that's looking at all of your products from a strategic point of view. You may have another persona that's an admin that needs to set up, product B to talk to product C. So these are just random things. But if you think about it from the point of view of your personas and the point of view of the individuals using your products, you have a different way of thinking about the path of your certification. So to make that a little bit more sort of tactical, I'll just tell you the example of when I worked at Amazon. When I was brought on at Amazon, there were 2 distinct advertising products. There's, and they're probably still called this, but they had the programmatic DSP solution and the sponsored ad solution. So I was brought on to build out the certification, and the initial thought was, let's do that on, again, product A and product B. But because of what I just said, I wanted to take a step back and really understand the way people were using these products. And lo and behold, there was, of course, a third persona that was our agency persona that strategically needs to use multiple advertising products together to achieve a goal. So if we had only done a certification on product A and product B, we would have totally lost the opportunity to certify that third very large group. So instead, we did the role-based certification, which was looking at the strategic persona. I don't remember the name of that one. I think it was something with strategy, but I don't remember the name of that certification. But it was the strategic use, basically, of these, I think it was strategic planner certification, of using these certifications to achieve that outcome. And then we had another persona that was more hands-on, setting up the DSP. So that was, for that certification. And then the third one was a totally different persona that used the advertising products in that way. So again, that would have been 2 very different outcomes if we did it by product, but instead we did it from the point of view of the outcomes that a certified user is trying to achieve. So this is one that can be challenging because it's really the same with any kind of educational curricular as well. I always talk about this when I talk about building out like a customer academy, to really think about the outcomes of your persona rather than thinking about it from an internal point of view, where internally you may have your business set up around products. but externally or client facing, that's not necessarily the way they're thinking about it. They're thinking about the outcomes they achieve with your products. So if you're certifying, you want to think about those outcomes. And that will help you structure your certification to grow, because also if you build this too much around the point of view of the product, then you're really stuck on that. And what happens when that product changes? What happens when you launch another product that's kind of works alongside that product? If you think about it more from the persona point of view, then every product change and every product launch will fit into those personas. So that's just one of my biggest takeaways on this webinar is to really think about structuring your technology certification from the point of view of your personas. So, oh, that did not work out. Look at that. Okay. So then we talk about levels and paths. And this is another topic that I really could just spend a long time on, because I do love curriculum, which I realize now makes me sound very nerdy, but I do. I love curriculum. It's just a strategy to curriculum. But when we think about how we're going to structure certification, we think about the leveling of certification, we think about the paths to certification. In these two examples on the left side, we have two paths, basically. Like, let's say that I have an admin persona and a developer persona. Both of these types of customers are using my products in very different ways, and they have to know different things. And this is very common. This is something like Salesforce, you see, has this type of thing where you have admin, Salesforce, and other personas with Salesforce. But in this example, I have an admin foundation certification, and then the next level, they would get a master certification, same on the developer side. And that's fine. That's a legitimate way to do that kind of pathing. But another thing to think about is if there's a lot of overlap between those two, and maybe all of your personas sort of need to know the same very foundational things, prerequisite things, before they get into more specialized ways of working with your product, then you could have a more modular approach, which is that foundation certification, which would be relevant to anyone. That's a pretty common path as well. But what I want you to think about with paths and levels is that it's not uncommon to see a company that's starting off with their first certification to really kind of think a bit myopically about that one certification, and not so much think about how that's going to fit into levels and paths and the growth of your certification program. So really think about, even if you're not building out the developer, maybe you just have been tasked to build admin foundations. But if you think for a moment about what other certifications will exist and what commonalities you're going to have across those different paths, it'll help you come up with a much more modular approach, because you want to remember that people are going to get certified, and then you want them to obtain that next level of certification. And then you want to think about, do two or more certifications combine together for a third level certification? But what is that pathing going to look like for people who are achieving certification with you? So important to think about that and to lay that out, even if it's not in your roadmap to build more than one this year, because a certification program is definitely a long-term play. It's much harder to kind of rewind and relaunch something that's out there as a certification, because you're going to brand that certification. You're going to be out there, with the industry, letting people know this certification exists. And so you really want to kind of have a sense of what that's going to grow into, rather than trying to retroactively backtrack or change your certification in another 6 months, because of leveling of paths. Just checking the chat. Okay. So yeah. So that's just food for thought on the leveling and paths. And now we will get into the topic of high stakes and low stakes. So this quote: "The higher the stakes for a test, the greater the responsibility of test developers to ensure we have evidence to ensure that evidence supports test quality and the proposed or intended use." Apparently, I can't read while I'm giving a webinar. You can read the quote. And that's from the International Test Commission and Association of Test Publishers. So we're going to talk about high stakes and low stakes assessment and what that means. But essentially, you've probably heard those terms, whether or not you're familiar with them, and you've probably heard the term of legal defensibility. So let's talk about when that matters, why that matters. And yeah. So low and high stakes certification really refers to literally what's at stake for the test taker. So the consequences of the outcomes of the test. So low stakes, for example, is going to be something like that marketing certification I talked about in the very beginning. You offer a certification to your market that's pretty easy to achieve. It doesn't really mean anything as far as like the outcome, the consequence of those outcomes. If somebody doesn't achieve that certification, there's no real consequence to them. If they do achieve it, they may share it on LinkedIn, they may put it on their resume, but it's not necessarily going to be something that anyone makes decisions off of. That's what's a lower stake certification in the context of certification. It comes from just generally speaking about low and high stakes assessment. So in a classroom, for example, a low stakes assessment is going to be just like a quiz given to kind of pulse check what your students are learning. There's no real stakes there. High stakes is going to be when there are consequences or potential ramifications to not getting that certification. So a high stakes certification may be something that is required to keep your job, required to get promoted. I have some examples here, like the reseller or partner certification is one where one's profession is actually at stake there, because if you're requiring me to obtain a certification before I can actually sell your product, and then I don't achieve that certification, I can't sell your product, that's actually impacting my my own profession. And of course, an employer required certification. So if my boss is expecting me to get this certification and I don't achieve it, that is pretty, specific consequences to me. So that's higher stakes certification. There are clear consequences to not obtaining that. And again, looking at the world like of academia, high stakes assessment may be something like the college entrance exams, a standard test that you pass upon completion of high school. So those are where there's literally like things at stake. So that's what you can think about. Now, the question of which should your certification be, do you want to create a high stakes or low stakes certification? There's not, this is my favorite answer, is that it depends, because you have to consider the strategy behind your certification. You have to think about why you're offering it and what value you want it to carry. There is definitely a school of thought that if you're offering a certification, you should think about it in being more of a high stakes certification, because that's really the value of certification. But as we talked about in the beginning, there are these marketing certifications that are lower stakes, and they serve a purpose doing that. I completed one not too long ago. I didn't even really do any of the learning. I just kind of took the exam, got a badge. It was fun. I shared it. It's a low stakes certification. And there could be value to that. There could be value to like just the fact that I shared the badge. I gave some organic free marketing to the company. But again, that's why it really matters why you're offering a certification. Now, if you're offering certification because you do see a problem with your partner quality, for example, or your reseller quality, maybe you have people out there that are completely misrepresenting your product, then you want to have a certification in place to know that they are representing your product well and you're bringing that quality bar. Then you're going to want to have a higher stakes certification, because that's something where it's really the actual outcomes of the certification is important to both you and to the person getting certified. So that's why you really have to think about, why are we doing this? What are the consequences of certification? Do we care? We meaning you as a business, do we care about whether someone is attained that mastery or not? Or is it more of a nice to have value add to your customer academy? So yeah, the value it should carry is the other question there. A related question to that is, if you want it to have a high value, you want people to kind of covet the certification. They're going to study for the certification. They're going to really work to earn the certification. That's going to be a higher stakes certification. If it's something, again, that's pretty easy to obtain, you can either guess your way through it or maybe take it one or two times and achieve it. That's going to not have the same value, obviously, right? So these are the questions you have to answer, and part of your overall strategy is why you're doing it, the value you want it to carry, and that kind of helps you understand whether it's a low stakes or high stakes or somewhere in between. I'm just checking my chat. All right, thanks, Jordan. Nice to see you. Okay, so the issue of legal defensibility then is related to this issue of high stakes and low stakes. So defensibility has to do with the question, are the assessment results and more generally your testing program defensible in a court of law? So the little graph here that you see is really actually showing the level of stakes, what's at stake. So you have your low to high stakes certification. And that kind of correlates with your level of concern regarding legal defensibility. Now, I want to specify that in anything you put out there, you should, of course, think about following standards, following quality. I'm not at all suggesting that if it's low stakes, just put anything out there. But I am just doing my due diligence to tell you that there's a correlation there, that if you have something that's a higher stakes, then you have to be more concerned with the risk of legal consequences, because you might imagine if you are requiring certification, or if an employer is requiring certification that you're offering, and somebody is not achieving that certification, they're more likely to be in a position to challenge whether that certification is legitimate or not, whether you're following the right standards, whether your scoring is done according to standards, than somebody who doesn't really have any consequences from that, right? So it's sort of just a bit of a common sense thing where you have level of stakes and level of risk there. But also things to keep in mind are your value and credibility. So if you offer a certification that's pretty low stakes, it will correlate with lower value, lower credibility. So it's just a question of how much does that matter to you? Are you looking for something that's high value, high credibility, high stakes? This matters. There's going to be some consequences, whether it's positive or negative, to that certification. Then just know that that's also something where you have to invest more in making sure that you have that legally defensible process in place. Again, I want to specify, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't care at all, because any test that you put out there, you should have some standards around. But if you really want to have that higher stakes, that's where you really need to think about the psychometric review of validity, reliability, and fairness, which I'll talk about in the next slide. But testingstandards.net is somewhere you can read a lot more about this. That's got the standards for educational and psychological testing, where you can really learn, like, when we say what standards are followed, that's what we mean. There's a lot of different things to keep in mind with regards to this valid, reliable, and fair process of creating certification. But one of the things that I wanted to clarify in this is that there is this spectrum, right? So you don't necessarily have to go all in on all of this and make sure you're following every little thing to that legal defensibility if that's not the intention of the certification that you're offering. So we just want to keep that in mind between the value and credibility, et cetera. All right. So the issue of legal defensibility, just to get into these three things more, validity is the degree to which evidence and theory supports the interpretation of the test scores for the proposed use of the test. So what that means is the certification exam that you've put out there is valid towards the use of that certification. So your test itself isn't valid. Validity is not connected to the test, it's connected to the use of the test. So more specifically, you may see like assessments for that people take upon job interviews. So that assessment needs to be measured as valid toward the job performance for that job that the person's interviewing for. But that same test can't then be turned around to use for something else. So you're actually looking at the validity of the use of the test and making sure that the interpretation of test scores are valid in the context of that use of the test. So if you're offering a certification to ensure that someone has achieved some level of mastery in a certain role, then your use of the test scores should be valid specifically for that use, if that makes sense. I think that was very wordy, but that's what validity is. So it's kind of a little bit of a potential misunderstanding that a exam is itself, or the assessment itself, needs to be valid, but it's specifically around the use of that. So reliability is sort of a component of validity, but it's about ensuring that the scores that the test takers receive are consistent across occasions. So you might hear of like test and retest reliability, but it refers to precision, accuracy, and repeatability of test scores. So if I take an exam today and I take that same exam or form of that exam in a couple of weeks, I should have similar scores, unless of course I've done a lot of studying, you know, and increase my score. But there shouldn't be changes and fluctuations to a certain degree between groups of test takers. So that reliability just, again, ensures that the score is actually reliable as a measure of that validity. Fairness is about ensuring the responsiveness to individual characteristics, so that test scores are valid in that interpretation of use. So here you want to consider the diversity of needs and potential inequities across your testing population. So one example of that is language, language barriers, is that affecting the test itself? But another example of that may be in the test delivery. If if somebody maybe is not, if the test itself is not about technology and somebody's actually getting caught up on the technology of the delivery of the test, then we have a bit of an issue, because now you may fail them because they had some issues with the technology that you're using to deliver the test, whereas somebody that's more technology savvy is able to pass that test. So you kind of have to think about the individual people that are taking the certification or taking the exam, and the fairness around that population. So this is super high level. As I said, there's the standards, what was the testingstandards.net has the very long PDF. I wouldn't suggest that you read it end to end unless you're interested in the metrics of it, but you can certainly get a sense for what these mean and more. And also you want to work with testing development experts and the psychometrics experts to help you ensure that you're looking at this if you're developing those high stakes certifications. So again, these are things where anyone should keep this in mind for any certification program, but those stakes become higher the higher the stakes. So checking my can I recommend a resource for building valid, reliable test items? Well, I can recommend me for some help with that, because that's what I do. But there's a lot of resources out there. I would have to follow up with you, but feel free to email me and I can send you some stuff that's maybe more relevant to what you're building too, because it's a big topic. First, there's assessment writing, there's item writing in general, making sure you're writing items objectively and making sure you're writing items to connect to the right, objectives that you're measuring. So there's just item writing, and then there's going to be the psychometrics involved with that, with like, ensuring that you have the right level of difficulty. So it's a big topic. I don't have like a resource off the top of my head, but I'm happy to follow up with you if you want to drop me an email after this webinar. Can you hear me now? Anyone? Yes. Okay. Strange. I guess my USB microphone decided to stop working in the middle of this, but thank you for letting me know. I'm glad I saw that. All right. I don't know how much I said, but y'all didn't hear me. All right. Thank you. When I move to this slide. Okay. All right. Well, I'll just repeat that. Thank you for letting me know. So what I was saying about this is that program policies are something unique to certification. That you'll often see if you do go to another website where there's a certification program, you'll typically see a link to your certification program policies. These are things you want to keep in mind as you build out certification, so that you've done all the things we just talked about, set up your goals. I don't know if you all heard me say that, but like set up your goals, thought about your assessment, et cetera, et cetera. So now we get to program policies. This is where you want to think about the expiration and recertification process. For example, will your certification expire? And as I said in the beginning, typically certifications do expire because they're intended to be think of it like somebody holds a certification and they hold an active certification. So maybe I obtain like a PMP certification this year, and I can put that on my resume and I can leave it there. But if I don't do things to maintain that level of mastery in those topics, then 2 years from now, I really can't necessarily say I'm at that same level of mastery, right? So certification, you hold that active certification. And so you typically want to expire it in the technology space, usually 2 years, 3 years, but because technology changes rapidly, you certainly don't want it to be like 5 years. You typically want it to be somewhere around 2 years. You don't want it to be too soon. You certainly don't want to expire after a year, especially if you're charging for that. You're likely to anger people if they have to take it too frequently. So 2 to 3 years is a typical expiration timeline. And then what will your recertification process look like? There's not really a right answer here either. It could be that they simply take the exam over the same way they did originally. It could be a recertification process that's different, where it's maybe a more truncated exam. If you have a certification where other things beyond just the test are required, so maybe there's some professional education units, which is not quite that common in technology, but it could be something like that. Or maybe it's just proof of use of the product for the last couple of years. That could all be part of your recertification process. So that's up to you to determine, but you want to think about those processes as well. So lockout and retake policies are important. If somebody fails it, do they get to take it again tomorrow, 2 minutes from now, or do they have to wait 90 days? Again, not really a right answer here, but it's kind of a measure of going back to the high stakes, low stakes, higher stakes, longer lockout. You're not going to want somebody to just be able to like retake the exam the next minute because, they failed. So that sort of correlates again with the credibility and security of your test. And your cut score process, again, that's something that should correlate with the legal defensibility, but you want to have a clear cut score process, and that's about setting your passing score, for example. So if you're not as familiar with that, it's really, you don't want to just take like a percentage and say, okay, 70% as a pass rate, because there are variances to exams, and you want to have a process in place that follows those standards we just talked about, where you actually set a measure of what's proficient, what isn't. So who is a master and who isn't? Who is able to say that they're reached that level and who isn't? And that process should follow the standards that are outlined in those examples I gave you. So that cut score process is an important piece. Also, you want to think about program perks. What does it mean to be certified? Do you get anything for that? Do you get to be part of a partner program? Do you get to be on a website? Like, is there a community aspect to getting certified? So you can think about program perks. You want to think about your verified credential and badges. So you've probably heard of Credly, Accredible. Those are two big players. But if you're doing this at scale and you're offering this through your learning management system or other testing program, how are you going to award certification? Are you going to do that internally on your LMS, or are you going to use something like Credly or Credible? And those are just essentially platforms where people can share their badges and credentials across a wide variety of channels. Content and exam updates. So this is important too. How often will you update your content and exam? So because it's a certification, you don't want to be doing that all the time. Somebody gets certified in a certain set of outcomes. You don't want to just change that completely in the next 3 months. So you want to have a cadence, and you want to have that documented as to when you'll update content, when you'll update the exam, and if that will at all impact people that have completed certification. And then the psychometric evaluation. So again, for those higher stakes certifications, you want to make sure that there is reliability and validity and fairness. And so it's good to have that reviewed and to ensure that you're working within those standards. And you want to think about your test delivery and proctoring. So proctoring is a whole other topic, but if you are, again, higher stakes, you want to think about test security. You want to think about ensuring that people don't cheat. And so that's where you can start thinking about proctoring and investing in a proctoring solution. So these are all things for you to consider, and this would be part of your overall program policy. Some of this that you would share externally with your certified interested users. And I have the and there because there is a little bit more to it than that. These are some of the more common things, but this is some of the stuff to think about as you're either expanding or building out your certification program. Already taking too much time here. So key takeaways. Determine your strategic goal. So why offer certification? You should know that before you really embark on building anything, because everything stems from the why. If you do follow me on LinkedIn, you probably know I talk about that in a variety of ways, but anything with education, anything with strategy always stems from the why, because that helps you determine what decisions you're going to make. It's really all about like, why are we doing this? Because that's your lens. Conduct a job task analysis is to help you build for the person and not the product. So thinking about the point of view, you want to build for the individual getting certified, not just specifically around your product itself. So that job task analysis is important. Build for the appropriate quote stakes. So remembering that higher stakes would correlate to a higher value, higher credibility, but also higher risk as far as legal defensibility. So when you make those decisions, and that really, again, stems from the strategic goal that you have set in the first place. And fourthly, adhere to professional standards. So I will say again that even if you're at lower stakes, you still want to think about reliability, validity, and fairness in anything you do with exams. But the higher the stakes, the more that is relevant, and adhering to those professional standards is really just a good practice to keep in mind as you're building out a certification program. So recapping, this is a certification. If you're offering a certificate, you have a lot more wiggle room there because it's about the learning experience, and you can really give a badge for kind of anything because somebody just has to complete the course to get the badge. We're talking about the assessment process, the exam process. That's a different ballgame. All right. So that is the end of my webinar. So don't be a stranger. Also, of course, I would be remiss to not plug myself. I can help if you're building a certification. I do this, so feel free to reach out if you're looking for some consulting and other support as well. Otherwise, and always, please feel free to connect with me if we're not connected on LinkedIn. Reach out anytime at vicky@echtus.com. And my website is echtus.com. Echtus comes from the word ect, which means authentic. So hope you enjoyed it. And I'm just going to check my chats again. Okay. All right. Well, if there's any questions that I didn't address in the chat, please feel free to email me or message me on LinkedIn. And I'm so glad that you all enjoyed it. I know it was a lot of info. This kind of crash course is a lot to cover in an hour. But I enjoyed speaking with speaking with y'all. And again, sorry for the audio disruption, but I'm glad I was able to get it back. So enjoy the rest of your week and take care.